On August 19th, 2024, myself and many people who were keeping up with Gege Akutami's Jujutsu Kaisen were met with the news that the series would be ending in just 5 chapters. Now, if you were actively keeping up with the series at the time, this was most likely a jarring decision, seeing as it didn't seem like there was enough time to both wrap up the ongoing battle with Uraume and Sukuna, while also still having time for a satisfying conclusion to the many plot threads that were still yet to be resolved. And that is because, well, simply put, there wasn't enough time to really do any of that in a satisfying manner. The climactic battle with Sukuna, and by proxy, the mostly off-screen fight between Hakari and Uraume, were wrapped up within 2 chapters from that announcement, leaving the final 3 or 4 if you want to count the epilogue that came out like half a year later, to serve as a neat little bow to wrap up the series as a whole. And in spite of the initial tone of this series resembling that of a slice of life series, for many people, myself included, the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen felt a little too whimsical when compared to the more serious tone that Akutami had previously set up before. Now, is that the only thing wrong with this ending? No. But I think it would take a little bit more of a deep dive to discuss all of the potential shortcomings of Jujutsu Kaisen's ending, so today we will be doing just that. Please understand though that this is not a hate letter to Gege, as for the most part, I still hold the series very fondly in my heart. Hell, when I made the History of JJK video, I had cited it as my favorite manga at the time, and though that isn't true now, as I've since been reminded how awesome SPR is, I'd still say JJK from Shibuya till Gojo's death is still easily some of the best battle shonen that there is. No story is perfect, but sometimes the shortcomings are just more noticeable than they are elsewhere. So today we will be discussing whether or not JJK's ending was really as bad as everybody said it was at the time, as well as the aspects of it that may lead somebody to coming out with that conclusion. Before we continue though, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you end up enjoying the video. These take a pretty good amount of time and effort to make, and it lets me know what to make more of. Also, I gotta give a quick shout out to my friends at Pilk Plays. If you grew up with Game Grumps like I did, or other general Let's Play channels, you'll be familiar with their style of content. It's honestly kind of a breath of fresh air amidst all of the hyper-edited Let's Plays nowadays. But I mentioned them specifically because they made a video calling me out, which was more or less just a request to make a JoJo's video. I know I said I was going to do that at the end of the previous video. I lied, I got more interested in doing this. In the meantime, I swear to God I'll get to it though. But yeah, they're pretty funny, so go check them out if you're interested in that sort of thing. Completely unrelated, but their thumbnail artist is super talented. I don't remember their handles, but I'll put them on screen. Go check it out. It's awesome. Anyways, okay, for reals, onto the video.
Dude, this car kicks ass!
Now, before we get into the actual ending of Jujutsu Kaisen, which I would consider to be from chapter 237 onwards, we need to sit down and have a talk about leak culture, and more specifically, how the JJK fandom was easily the most reckless fandom in terms of not being considerate to literally anybody else about spoilers. For those who were lucky enough to not be consuming JJK content during that period, the night before every chapter released, a couple of leakers on Twitter and Reddit would show the raw, untranslated scans to those who were looking for it, which I guess isn't a horrible thing inherently. However, people would then take the most eye-catching panels from these scans and proceed to repost them all over TikTok, Instagram, or pretty much any social media platform that could have images shared within them, without spoiler warnings for everybody to see. So if you were actually interested in, reading the chapter when it was properly translated and actually came out, you pretty much had to stay clear of any social media platforms until you could. And I can tell you that no matter what, if you went on social media at all anytime after leaks were out, you were guaranteed to see the biggest spoiler for the chapter no matter how fast you tried skipping past anything. I started reading around when Kenjaku died, and basically half of the cool reveals were spoiled for me before I had a chance to read them with my friends. Yuta's domain, Miguel's sudden reappearance, Yuta and Gojo's body, Sukuna's reformed domain, Chosa's death, Toto's comeback. Pretty much all of the broad strokes were spoiled to some extent to me or my friends as JJK was coming out weekly. Kinda makes it hard to be on the edge of your seat waiting for what's gonna happen next when some fuck ass is shouting from the rooftops about what's gonna happen next before you even get a chance to see it yourself. Not to mention that anything that has happened in the manga post Shibuya has been reposted to death online. Hakari and Higuruma, the Zenyan clan's death, Sukuna stealing Megami's bag, and of course, biggest of all, Gojo's death, have all been posted so much that I would be surprised to see anybody going into the upcoming seasons of the anime not knowing what's gonna happen. Gojo's death is posted so often that I literally do not know a single person who didn't learn of it before they got a chance to see it themselves. Fuck you, Usher. It's honestly tragic that this kind of became the normal during JJK's release, as now I'm seeing it bleed into other series like Invincible or the upcoming animated SPR. They're series that I've read, and thus I'm not affected by spoilers, but just going into the comments about posts from upcoming content for show adaptations of pre-existing material, half of the comments will be people complaining about having something really cool spoiled for them, while the other half are blaming the initial half for not reading something already as, oh well, it's been a thing for such and such amount of time, so really it's your fault for getting spoiled. It's just a really lame way of viewing things, and I've only seen it spread like wildfire after the popularization of JJK's spoiler culture. Also, one last side note, but it was completely bizarre to see people insisting that that leakers were more deserving of the thanks for JJK rather than the author themselves, simply because they didn't personally like the ending of the series. Leakers didn't do shit except make the series more accessible for people who wanted to spoil it. Most of the leaks weren't even translated, and in the end the people still had to wait the extra time that everybody else did to properly understand the chapter, except with the added bonus that they got brownie points for seeing the panels earlier than everybody else.
You with that broken piece of plate?
So, you know that other fight that was happening simultaneously to the Sukuna versus everybody fight? Yeah, Hakari, one of the most popular characters in the series and my personal second favorite character, versus one of the most powerful curse users in the verse. You would think that it would be pretty hard to have a boring fight with this given matchup, and thankfully Gege manages to navigate away from the fight being boring by fucking not showing it at all. In fact, I counted 20 pages where we can actually see the two fighting together, and 15 of these occur before chapter 239. For reference, a JJK chapter is typically only around 19 pages max, meaning that even including entire pages where only one panel of this fight is actually happening, Hakari vs Uraume only takes up a maximum of 3% of the screen time during the span of these 31 chapters. And that percentage only slightly increases when you account for the month where Gege got deathly ill after having to draw Gojo for 3 panels, among the other oddities that may have happened page-wise. So, what happened here? It's not like Gege can't write for multiple fights occurring at the same time. Hell, we had an instance of that during this very arc. Well, my theory, I say it's my theory, but I stole it from a friend, is that Gege didn't really know how to write another fight with Hakari without it being more or less the same as the Kashima fight. I think this makes the most sense, as realistically, I'm not sure how you could keep making Hakari get away with barely getting a jackpot off in time to keep throwing hands. But it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of that explored, as even among the many issues that are present with JJK's final arc, I think one of Gege's greatest strengths is his ability to put together very cohesive fight choreography. I remember when it was announced that JJK only had 5 chapters left, one of my biggest concerns was, oh, well, how is he gonna wrap up Hakari vs Uraume? And the simple answer is that, well, he kinda didn't. We get our first glimpse of them in like 15 chapters, and Uraume is basically just like, oh, well, we would have won if it was 1,000 years ago, before taking themselves out. It just feels like after a certain point, Gege just gave up on these two, which is a shame because I think they're super cool characters that deserved far better. It's sad that Hakari didn't get a chance to run the gauntlet with Sukuna, as Yuta was glazing the shit out of him that one time, saying some, oh, well, when he's pissed off, he's an even stronger sorcerer than I am. Hell, even Gege said that Hakari was great at domain clashes, and we literally never saw him partake in one.
I cuddle with my kids. I tell bedtime stories in front of my kids.
I think most people forget amidst the chaos of Sukuna's Fortnite Battle Royale that Kenjaku was a more present villain than Sukuna for the majority of the series, and arguably a bigger threat with his whole scheme to cause the great merger between Japan and Tengen. I mean, this is the man-brain thing that imprisoned Gojo for a third of the series, started the Culling Games, the magnum opus of Jujutsu barrier techniques, and was responsible for the death of Yuki Tsukumo, one of the 4 special grade sorcerers that was alive during our time with the series. Kenjaku was the man with the plan, the man who took backshots to succeed with his evil schemes, and what came of it? By the end of Kenjaku's reign, it just kind of feels like everything he spent 1,000 years working towards was thwarted rather easily. The Culling Games themselves get sidelined so quickly during the Sukuna fight that Gege basically just hopes he'll accept them ending in a throwaway line in the second to last chapter. I understand that they're obviously not the focus at this point, as both of the main villains are dead, but the games themselves were implied to be a process that took centuries of planning, utilizing Tengen's barriers to have a basis for continuing their existence perpetually. And though they basically served their purpose plot-wise, the whole point of them was that they were supposed to be practically impossible to end, except for that one rule that was added at the end, but that condition wasn't met either. So what gives? The barriers they were built on were still up, the players that needed to die to end it were still alive, but magically they're ended. Hell, they could have done some Hunter x Hunter shit and said there was like a cursed energy exorcist that dealt with the barriers, so at least we got a little bit of an explanation. But no, a whole half a chapter had to be dedicated to a simple domain vampire. It's also kind of crazy to think that Kenjaku was the main protagonist's mother, and they literally only share like 2 lines of dialogue together at the end of Shibuya. You would think that something that crazy, or something that could have a really cool dynamic behind it, would be explored even just a little bit, but no. Also, side note, but in chapter 255, Gege explained that Yuji's dad was Sukuna's twin that he had ate in utero like 1,000 years ago, and that his soul had just floated around until he became Yuji's dad, and that's why he's able to be a vessel for Sukuna, which is cool. But guess what? Who else but Gege himself retconned it like half a year later as a cliff note in a chapter trivia thing. So literally neither of Yuji's parents matter in the grand scheme of things.
Wow. Edge.
Get used to me bringing up Hunter x Hunter a lot, as it's not only just good, but Gege apparently based a lot of his homework here on it, so obvious comparisons will be drawn when they are apparent. It's no secret that cursed energy as a power system is largely based off of Hunter x Hunter's Nen, and that's kinda cool as it gives viewers of Hunter x Hunter a sense of familiarity with this power system, while also getting the chance to see it be expanded with cursed energy, and for the most part, cursed energy serves its role as a power system rather effectively. That is, until the very end of the series. For the most part, cursed energy feels like a rather solid and consistent, if poorly defined power system, but all of the balls are thrown to the walls during these last chapters through the use of binding vows. Now, it's no secret to anybody that delves into JJK lore that binding vows are the backbone of sorcery, as basically everything can be defined or explained by some sort of binding vow. For example, you can determine that Sukuna's Dismantle and Cleave have different power levels because of the required input needed for performing said moves. However, there's a difference between an inferred binding vow that would fit rather naturally versus Gege explaining literally everything that doesn't make a whole lot of sense through them. I don't mind it as much for characters like Gojo and Sukuna as they are literally the best of the best, but when you go out of your way to demonstrate how hard it is to change the conditions for a technique on the fly, only to then have basically every remotely important character do just that in the following chapters, it can feel a little bit cheap. Something that makes so strong as a power system is the permanence of it. But Epica's power is only really good in really niche situations. And the binding vows that Gege lets people change freely in his system are something that is basically unbreakable with Nen. Spoilers for Hunter x Hunter, but one of the greatest feats of strength that we see is when Gon unleashes all of his potential on Pito. It's an incredible sacrifice, throwing away basically his entire future in Nen for the sake of avenging Kite, and it certainly would not go without consequences. It took an entire arc to get Gon back to a state where he could even function for himself again. Meanwhile, in JJK, we have Todo coming back after 150 chapters of inactivity, simply stating that he has changed the conditions for his curse technique, and that it's actually made it better. Like, why is he just allowed to do that? Especially when Gege stated outright that his boogie woogie was dead or whatever the shit. Why is him clapping his stub then not considered applause? It sounds like a clap, couldn't he just change it to that? And since it doesn't count as applause, why the hell does a Viberslap count? I love Todo, he's my favorite character in the series, but the logistics of his return are just not there. Even in Sukuna's case, where I'd say it's mostly acceptable, there's some pretty egregious stuff. Like, why is he just allowed to alter the hand sign for his domain on the fly? Everybody else has a unique one, so why is he allowed to copy Gojo's? Or hell, even in the Gojo fight, why was he allowed to shift the damage from Infinite Void to Megami's Soul? I could see there being a decent explanation to either of these two that I'm just not aware of, so feel free to let me know. But it feels like Gege just needed to keep Sukuna out of trouble because, you know, he needed to kill Gojo. And a lot of this stuff feels like it could have been done fine with time, but Gege just didn't want to take the time to set them up, or didn't have enough time to set them up given how soon he was ending the series. Readers of JJK very quickly got familiarized with the cycle of Sukuna, where someone would get introduced, talk some shit, get glazed by the narrator or Sukuna himself, and then promptly get fodderized, only to get repeated again shortly thereafter. And this sounds kinda cool in theory, as you effectively get to give everybody a chance to have a one-on-one with the King of Curses. However, in practice, this basically just means that everybody that was hyped or glazed for the entire series up this point would maybe get 2 good hits on Sukuna before they'd just be removed from the plot once more. Which, let's be honest, isn't the most satisfying thing in the world if your favorite character is literally anybody but Sukuna. Let's take Kashimo for example. This man was super hyped up as the strongest sorcerer of his era, and was even a problem for local immortal man Hakari. Hell, his curse technique is a one-time use, so it must be really cool, right? What was initially described as, oh, he can use any and all phenomena that can be created by electricity as a weapon in his arsenal, basically just resulted in he's kinda fast and can punch hard. He barely even uses electricity in his fight, and when he does, it's to glaze the shit out of Sukuna before getting off-screened in 8 pages. Not to use the word potential too much, but it just feels like wasted potential to have all of these characters hyped up so hard for literally an entire series just to be a cliff note in the Sukuna fight. I understand that that's probably the point, like, oh well, look at how much better Sukuna is than everybody. But when your arsenal consists of a God of Lightning, Toji 2.0, potential second only to Gojo, and the next Gojo himself, only for them to all basically get like a chapter's worth of fighting Sukuna, it can feel a bit repetitive. There also comes a point where it feels like Gege is actively running out of characters to throw in there, so we get some completely out of left field picks like fucking Miguel and Kusakabe. I'm not sure if these were supposed to be these crazy hype moments, as though they did spawn some pretty funny memes. Who the hell actually wanted these two to fight? Gege basically ended every chapter of this arc with some sort of crazy reveal, but the attempt to keep the aura and hype moments going makes every consecutive reveal feel less and less important. When you try really hard to milk your audience's ability to be hyped in a rapid fire manner, I find that, personally, it kinda just makes a lot of this stuff fall flat. By the last 5 or so chapters of the fight where it was just Yuji and the gang versus Sukuna, I literally felt nothing reading it weekly because of the sheer volume of slop that had happened up to this point. Hell, when Nobara's return return happened, I wasn't even upset about getting what would ordinarily be a massive spoiler. I distinctly remember just being like, oh, okay. Speaking of Nobara's return, remember when JJK was a series known for killing half of its cast? Well, that's not really the case anymore because literally everybody comes back for fucking some reason. The only people who actually stayed dead in the final arc, aside from Gojo, are Kashimo and Choso. But Nobara, Higuruma, Kusakabe, Yuta, Kenjaku, and hell, even Todo to an extent, get random, mostly undeserved comebacks. I think I took the most issue personally with Nobara and Higuruma, so let's go play by play with them. Nobara is a character who had one of the most heart-wrenching and sad deaths I've seen in an anime. And though there was a line that left just the tiniest bit of room for her to be alive, after that point there was a scene that highly implied that she had died. Yet when push comes to shove, Gege pulls her out of his ass for the sake of having one final get out of jail free card for Yuji. A tragic character death at the end of one of the series' most brutal arcs was effectively undone for the sake of Gege being able to go, look guys, it's that character you really like. Isn't that so cool? Well, Gege, by this point, not really. Higuruma, on the other hand, especially pisses me off. If you pay any attention to the scaling in this series, you will understand that, even in spite of Sukuna's overwhelming strength in the end of the series, half of his technique, Cleave, had the absolute shit nerfed out of it. Cleave is stated to be an attack that adjusts itself to its target's cursed energy levels, thus making it an attack that should obliterate an enemy in one swoop, as stated in the Maharaga fight. This one attack could kill Maharaga, yet when push comes to shove, basically everybody has a go at tanking Cleave, including Higuruma, who has a dramatic death moment in the middle of the battle, only to pull up in the post-game interview to be like, oh well, Sukuna was just fucking around. I'm glad he was playing around because otherwise I would have totally died. Like, are we fucking serious? Does nothing matter anymore? No, it doesn't. Let's take a look at Yuta, because I remember being super curious about the consequences of him throwing away his humanity or potentially losing his body or life or whatever. How does his gambit to use Gojo's body work out for him? Actually, just fine. For whatever reason, in spite of the previous weight the series gave to the decision to reuse Gojo's body, Yuta has absolutely zero consequences for the monstrous decision that he made. Just a reminder that the outcomes that Gege had set up for Yuta were he dies again, or he gets trapped in Gojo's body, which would have all been actual meaningful conundrums to see unfold. But no, he uses the power of friendship to live long enough to end up in the epilogue. I think this whole chain of events is like half of my problem with the ending. It feels like no matter what happens, there are absolutely zero consequences to anything after Gojo's death. Even with the two deaths that actually stick, it feels like there's no weight to them either because we get so little time with them before we get back to our regularly scheduled Aura plus hype moments. Remember when Yuji got a chance to be the main character? Remember when Yuji got to use Furnace? Remember when Yuji's domain or technique was given any proper depth or explanation, or fuck, even a name in the case of the domain? Remember when they had Yuji in the majority of the fight? Yeah, me neither. Yuji makes me so sad because he's such a cool main character when he actually gets a chance to be involved in the plot. But between him never talking with Kenjaku and his familiar relation to Sukuna being retconned so hard it basically doesn't matter anymore, and his actual technique and role in the fight being completely sidelined, I can't help but feel that Gege just didn't like Yuji. Which is the truth. Gege has stated that he doesn't like writing for Yuji, but it's so apparent in this last arc that he just ran out of shit for him to do. Yuji would basically get given one cool thing to do every 10 chapters or so before being sidelined yet again. Hell, for like half of the fight, he was just RCTing off screen. And I think that Gege running out of ideas wasn't only a problem for Yuji, but also for most of the other characters as well. The only characters I feel this didn't apply to were Yuta and Todo, though Gege definitely fumbled by not making Todo ask Sukuna what his type was. Ino, who was hyped up as Nanami's student with a really cool technique, one decent showing and then vauderized. Maki, two cool showings where she steals Toji's bag before being kicked out of the fight. Higuruma was such a victim of this that I think Gege actually believed he died before he changed his mind later. And the list goes on and on. Shibuya was an excellent showing of how to handle a bunch of moving parts in a close scenario, but a large part of why that worked is just because of the fact that they were all 1v1s with an overarching narrative rather than an overarching fight that feels like it's trying to cram as much into it as possible. So, what are we left with? Well, the rest of the manga is there at least. And this all isn't to say that Shinjuku onwards is straight up just bad. It is still, at least in my opinion, a good arc. Just not as strong an arc as the rest of the series, and certainly not as good of a conclusion as many were expecting. If you don't believe me that the arc is tolerable, please just go give it a reread, but all together instead of like the weekly shit that we had to deal with. I think as a cohesive work, it's a lot better than just reading it as it comes out. So, what happened? A consensus that I've heard, and one that I agree with, is that Gege was likely just tired of working on JJK. You can at least feel that he's not as enthusiastic as he once was with creating this fight versus many of the smaller ones in the series. There's a debate to be had about crunch culture in shonen manga, as it's not exactly an uncommon issue, with the creators of some of the most popular series being pushed to their physical and mental limits due to high demands from their publishers. Or hell, maybe Gege just got burnt out from working on the series for so long. It just feels like he didn't have an end goal in mind, and as such, when it came time to actually finish his homework, the latter half just felt lazier because he didn't have his full passion into it. I know it sounds like Gege is going to work on other manga series in the coming years, so maybe he was just super eager to move on to that. Only he knows for certain, but for many, myself included, it's just unfortunate to see how the ending ended up when the previous entries in this manga had so much promise. I legit read all of the manga in the span of a day after watching Shibuya, and I was so hyped the entire time. However, it just felt tragic to see the gradual decline in the clarity of Gege's work as a whole as the series went along. Rest in peace, JJK. You will be missed. Please don't give us a JJK Shippuden, we don't fucking need it. So yeah, that was pretty much why I think that JJK's ending fell flat for so many people. This is a video that I've wanted to do for a bit, but I didn't know how I was trying to word what I wanted to say, so it's here now, like a year later. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I promised you a shorter wait time than the last video, and I technically wasn't wrong, but it was still like a month, so I'm sorry. But I will be back with a video sooner. I've got a couple ideas in the oven right now, and I'm hyped to actually see them fleshed out. Alright, anyways, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye!